The river was quiet that night. Just water, moonlight, and a boy who only wanted to feel clean and free for a moment. He didn't know someone was watching from the trees. He didn't know his whole life was about to change before the sun came up. When he woke, the air felt different. Cold metal touched his wrist. He blinked, confused, then his heart stopped. A chain around his wrist, attached to a bed he didn't recognize. Somewhere close, footsteps, slow, careful. Like someone who had been waiting all night just to see his eyes open. He wanted to scream, but a deep voice spoke first, calm, almost gentle. "You're safe now," it said, "but you're not leaving." What happened in that river? Who was watching him? And why did the danger feel like it was only just beginning? Before we go any further, if stories like this pull you in, hit that subscribe button. More stories like this one are coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The forest smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Soren walked the same path he always walked, past the old fence with the broken gate, past the field where the wildflowers grew taller than his knees. He carried a basket on his arm. Bread, a jar of honey, a little cheese wrapped in cloth. His grandmother's list, the same list every week. He hummed as he walked. Not a real song, just a tune he made up years ago, back when he was small enough to still believe the forest had fairies in it. He didn't believe that anymore, but the humming stayed. Birds moved through the trees above him. A rabbit darted across the path and vanished into the brush. Soren smiled at that. Small things like that made him happy. He didn't need much. A warm bed, his grandmother's cooking, the sound of the river at night, soft and steady like the world breathing. He was an Omega, and in this town that came with rules. Don't walk alone after dark. Don't wander too far past the tree line. Don't talk to strangers, especially the ones who wore suits too clean for a place like this. Soren followed most of those rules, most of them. The town sat at the edge of something bigger, something he only half understood. Big black cars sometimes rolled through the main road, slow, careful, like they were counting the houses. Men in dark coats stood at the corners sometimes, not doing anything, just standing, watching. Nobody talked about why. Nobody asked questions. That was its own kind of rule too. His grandmother called it business. She said it the way people say the name of a storm that's already passed, something you don't discuss twice. "There's a war happening," she told him once, stirring soup over the stove, not looking up. "Not the kind with guns in the street, the kind that happens behind doors. You stay out of it, you hear me?" Soren had nodded. He always nodded. It was easy to nod when the war, whatever it was, never touched him. Until the day it did, sort of, in a small way, in a way that felt bigger than it should have. It happened at the market 3 weeks before that night at the river. Soren was picking through apples, checking each one for soft spots, when a shadow fell over the stall. He looked up, expecting the fruit seller. Instead, there was a man, tall, dark hair combed back neat, a black coat that fit him too well for someone standing in a dusty market square. He wasn't looking at the apples. He was looking at Soren. "You dropped this," the man said, and held out a small folded paper Soren was certain he never had. Soren stared at it, then at the man's face. Sharp jaw, steady eyes, the kind that didn't blink much. Not unkind, just careful, watching like he was studying something he didn't fully understand yet. "That's not mine," Soren said. The man's mouth moved, almost a smile, not quite. "Take it anyway." Soren didn't. He picked up his basket and walked away fast, heart thudding for no reason he could name. When he looked back, the man was gone. The paper was gone too. Maybe it had never existed at all. He didn't tell his grandmother. He told himself it was nothing. A strange man in a market. Strange men existed everywhere. But that night, lying in bed, he found himself thinking about those eyes. The way they didn't just look at him, they seemed to search him, like he was a puzzle the man was trying to solve before anyone else could get there first. He told himself he'd never see the man again. He was wrong. Across town, in a house too large for the quiet street it sat on, Damon Voss stood at his window with a glass in his hand he hadn't touched. Below him, his men moved through the yard, doing the small nothing tasks that filled the hours. Patrol, check the gate, watch the road. Damon didn't watch them. He was looking past them, toward the direction of the market, though the market wasn't visible from here. He was thinking about apples, about a boy with tired, kind eyes who looked at him like he was something to be afraid of. That was fair. People should be afraid of him. His father built this family on fear, and Damon inherited it the way some men inherit debt, quietly, completely, whether he wanted it or not. He hadn't wanted to speak to the boy. He told himself that after walking back to the house, hands in his pockets, jaw tight, it had been unnecessary, reckless even. There were eyes on him always, rivals, watchers, men who wrote reports about where he went and who he spoke to. A boy from the town, an omega with no name in any file Damon had ever seen, should have meant nothing. And yet, there was a knock at his study door. His second, Mercer, stepped in without waiting for an answer, the way he always did. "The Callahan family made a move," Mercer said. "Northern shipment. They think we don't know." Damon turned from the window. "We know. They think we're weak since your father passed. Let them think it." Mercer studied him a moment too long. "You're distracted." "I'm not. You've been standing at that window for 20 minutes. Damon didn't answer. Mercer didn't push. That was the nature of their partnership. Mercer noticed everything and said just enough to make sure Damon knew he'd noticed, then let it go. But it wasn't nothing. Damon knew that too, even if he wouldn't say it aloud. The Callahans were circling. His father's old allies were watching to see if the son could hold what the father built. Every week brought a new threat dressed as an opportunity, a new smiling face that wanted something from him. He hadn't trusted a room full of people in longer than he could remember. And then there was a boy with a basket of apples who looked at him like he was dangerous, not impressed by him, not afraid of his name, just wary of him as a stranger, the way anyone should be wary of a stranger in a market. It was such a small, ordinary thing. Damon didn't know why it sat in his chest the way it did. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that for 3 weeks. Soren's grandmother got sicker that same week, slow at first, then faster. A cough that didn't leave. Nights where she couldn't catch her breath right. The town doctor came, gave her medicine, said rest, said fluids, said the things doctors say when they aren't sure themselves. Soren took over the cooking, the cleaning. He sat by her bed some nights just to make sure she was still breathing, counting the rise and fall of her chest until his own eyes grew heavy. It wore on him, though he never let it show outside their small house. Inside alone, it wore on him plenty. That was why, on a warm night near the end of that 3rd week, when the air felt too thick to sit still in, he did something he never did. He walked down to the river after dark. He told himself it would only be for a few minutes, just to cool off, just to breathe air that didn't smell like sickness and medicine. The river was close, just past the tree line his grandmother always warned him about, and the moon was bright enough to see by. He stood at the edge of the water for a long moment before he stepped in. The cold hit his ankles first, then his knees, and something in his chest loosened for the first time in days. The current wasn't strong here, just enough to feel alive against his skin. He waded out until the water reached his waist, tilted his head back, and looked up at the stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown a handful of salt into the dark. For a moment, just a moment, he forgot about the sickness in the house behind him. He forgot about strange men in market squares. He forgot about rules and warnings and the careful shape his whole life had folded itself into. He didn't notice the black car parked at the edge of the tree line, engine quiet, headlights off. He didn't notice the man standing beside it, arms crossed, watching the water the same way he'd once watched a boy holding a basket of apples, like something he needed to understand before anyone else could take it from him. Soren closed his eyes, and let the water hold him for one more minute. He had no way of knowing it would be his last minute of the life he understood. The water was warm around Soren's shoulders when the first sound reached him. Not a loud sound, a small one, a branch snapping somewhere in the trees, sharp and out of place against the soft hush of the river. He opened his eyes. Nothing, just the dark line of trees, the moon sitting fat and low over the water, his own breath slowing back to normal. He told himself it was a deer. Deer came down to drink sometimes. He'd heard them plenty of nights sitting on the porch with his grandmother, back before she got sick, back when nights were simple things. He almost believed it, almost turned back to face the sky again and let the water hold him a little longer. Then he heard the second sound, footsteps, slow, careful, trying not to be footsteps at all. Soren's whole body went still in the water. His heart picked up fast, the way it does right before the mind understands why. He turned toward the sound, and that was when he saw them. Two men, not from the town. He knew everyone in the town, every face, every name, and these were strangers standing at the edge of the water in dark clothes that didn't belong to farmers or fishermen. One of them held something in his hand. Soren couldn't tell what, not in the dark, not with the water blurring everything into shapes and shadows. "Easy," one of the men said, not to Soren, to the other man, like they were discussing something ordinary, like Soren wasn't even the point. Soren's mind screamed at him to move, and for a moment his body didn't listen, frozen the way animals freeze when a bigger thing steps into their world. Then his legs finally obeyed. He turned and pushed through the water toward the far bank, away from the men, away from anything he understood. He didn't get far. A third man stepped out from the trees on the other side, and Soren realized too late that he'd been standing in the middle of something already closed around him. The water slowed him down. His feet slipped on the smooth stones beneath him. He went under once, came up gasping, and by the time he found his footing again, one of the men was already in the river, closing the distance between them like it cost him nothing at all. Soren opened his mouth to scream. A hand covered it before the sound could leave him. He fought. He would remember that later, remember it clearly, the way his nails dragged against a sleeve, the way his knee connected with something solid, and he heard a grunt of pain that gave him one bright second of hope. But there were three of them, and he was one boy standing waist-deep in a river with nowhere to run, and no one close enough to hear him even if he could scream. The last thing he saw clearly was the moon, tilting sideways as the world spun, and then something pressed to his face that smelled sharp and wrong, and the moon went out like someone had reached up and closed a hand around it. He woke to warmth. That confused him first before anything else did. Warmth and softness beneath him, and a smell that wasn't the river at all, clean linen, faint smoke from a fireplace somewhere, something rich and unfamiliar underneath it all. His head throbbed. His mouth felt dry like he'd swallowed sand. He blinked slowly, waiting for his eyes to make sense of the ceiling above him. High, carved wood, dark and old, nothing like the low tin roof of his grandmother's house. He sat up too fast. The room spun. He pressed a hand to his forehead and waited for it to steady, and that was when he felt it, a pull at his wrist. Small, metal, cold. He looked down. A chain. Thin, but unmistakably real, looped once around his wrist and locked with a small brass clasp, running from his skin to a ring bolted into the heavy wooden bed frame beside him. For a long moment, Soren simply stared at it. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. He pulled once, gently, as if maybe it would fall away on its own, as if this was some strange dream his body hadn't finished waking up from. It didn't fall away. It held, cold and solid, a small sound of metal against metal, the only reply he got. "No," he said, quiet almost to himself, then louder, "No, no." He yanked harder this time, both hands wrapping around the chain, and the metal bit into his wrist enough to make him gasp. He looked around the room properly now, tall windows with the curtains drawn back just enough to show the moon still hanging outside, a fireplace burning low, a chair in the corner, a door across the room that looked heavier than any door in his life had ever needed to be. This wasn't his home. This wasn't anywhere close to his home. His breathing came fast and short. Panic, real panic, the kind that made his hands shake and his thoughts scatter in 10 directions at once. He thought of his grandmother, alone in that small house, coughing in her sleep, waiting for him to come back with water and medicine. He thought of the men in the river, the hand over his mouth, the moon going dark. He thought, someone took me. The door opened. Soren's whole body locked in place. He watched the man step into the room, tall, dark hair combed back neat. A black coat hung over one arm like he'd just come from somewhere important, or was about to go somewhere important, and this was simply a stop along the way. He knew that face. The market, the apples, the paper he never took. "You," Soren said, voice cracking despite himself. Damon Voss stopped a few feet from the bed. He didn't come closer than that. He seemed, if anything, careful about it, the way someone is careful around something they don't want to frighten further, though the chain on Soren's wrist told a different story entirely. "You're safe," Damon said. His voice was steady, low, not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "I know that's hard to believe right now." "Safe?" Soren's laugh came out sharp, more disbelief than humor. He held up his wrist, the chain rattling with emotion. "This is safe." Damon's jaw tightened just slightly, like the sight of the chain cost him something too. "That's temporary." "Temporary?" Soren's hands curled into fists. "Why am I here? What do you want from me? Where's—" His voice caught. "My grandmother, she's sick, she needs me, I have to go home." "You can't go home right now." "Why not?" Damon was quiet for a moment. Soren watched something pass behind his eyes, not hesitation exactly, more like a man deciding how much truth a person could hold before it broke them. "There are people," Damon finally said, "who would hurt you to hurt me, and 3 nights ago they learned your name." Soren stared at him. The words didn't fit together in any shape that made sense. "I don't know you. I don't know anything about you. Why would anyone?" "Because I spoke to you in that market." Damon's voice dropped lower, almost angry, though Soren understood, somewhere underneath his own fear, that the anger wasn't aimed at him. "Because someone was watching when I did, and now they think you matter to me. And in my world, that's enough to get someone killed." The room went very quiet. The fire popped once in the silence, sending a small burst of light across the wall. "So you took me," Soren said slowly, "to protect me, by chaining me to a bed." "I took you," Damon said, "because I couldn't protect you any other way in time. The chain isn't about keeping you here. It's about making sure you don't walk out that door before I can make sure the men outside it aren't waiting for exactly that." Soren shook his head, tears building hot and sudden behind his eyes, more from fear and exhaustion than anything else. "This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. I want to go home." "I know." For the first time, something in Damon's expression cracked, not much, just enough for Soren to see it. "And the moment it's safe, you will." "When is that?" Damon didn't answer right away. And in the silence that stretched between them, in the way his eyes moved briefly toward the window, toward the dark grounds outside where Soren could just make out the shapes of men standing at careful distances from each other, patrolling something, guarding something, Soren understood the truth before Damon ever said it aloud. "I don't know," Damon admitted quietly, "but it isn't tonight." Soren looked down at the chain around his wrist, then back up at the man standing at the foot of the bed. A stranger from a market, a name he didn't know until tonight, a face that had haunted 3 weeks of his sleep for reasons he never let himself examine too closely. "What happens now?" Soren whispered. Outside, far in the distance, a sound rolled across the night. Low, sharp, unmistakable even to someone who had never heard it before. "A gunshot." Damon's head turned toward the window instantly, his whole body going rigid, one hand already moving toward something hidden beneath his coat. "Stay here," he said, already moving toward the door. "Whatever happens, stay here." And then he was gone, the door closing hard behind him, leaving Soren alone in a strange room with a chain around his wrist and the sound of something dangerous unfolding just beyond the walls. Soren sat frozen on the bed for a long moment after the door slammed shut. The gunshot still rang in his ears, echoing louder than it had any right to, considering how far away it must have been. He waited for another. None came. Just silence, thick and waiting, the kind of silence that felt worse than noise. He looked down at the chain again, pulled at it once, testing the strength of the bolt in the bed frame, and felt it hold firm, unmoving. His wrist already ached where the metal pressed against his skin. Think, he told himself, think. But thinking was hard when his whole body still remembered the river, the cold water, the hand over his mouth, the moon going dark. He pressed his free hand against his chest and tried to slow his breathing the way his grandmother taught him once, years ago, after a bad dream. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Soren lost track, sitting in that strange bed in that strange room, listening for any sound that would tell him what was happening beyond the door. Voices came eventually, low, urgent, moving down what sounded like a long hallway. He caught fragments, perimeter, north gate, 2 men down, none of it meaning anything to him, all of it terrifying in the way unfamiliar words about violence always are. Then the door opened again, and it wasn't Damon. A woman stepped in first, sharp-eyed, dark hair pulled back tight, a gun holstered at her hip like it was as ordinary as a house key. Behind her came an older man, silver at the temples, face lined with the kind of tiredness that came from decades of nights like this one. "He's awake," the woman said, not to Soren but to the man behind her. "I can see that raise." The older man's eyes moved to Soren, studying him the way someone studies a problem they didn't ask for. So this is him. Soren pulled his knees up instinctively, putting distance between himself and the strangers, though the chain didn't allow for much distance at all. "Where's Damon?" The older man's eyebrows lifted slightly at the use of the first name, though he said nothing about it. "Handling the mess outside, which, by the way, is entirely because of you." "Mercer," the woman named Ray said, a warning in her voice. "It's true," Mercer said, not backing down. "The Callahans hit the north gate 20 minutes ago. 2 of our men are in the infirmary right now. You want to know why? Because word got out that Damon has a weakness now, a pretty little omega he pulled out of a river." Soren's stomach turned cold. "I'm not his, I don't even know him." "Doesn't matter what you know," Mercer said. "Matters what they believe. And right now, half the families in this city believe Damon Voss finally has something worth using against him." The words landed heavy, and Soren felt something shift inside him, not just fear now, but a slow, sick understanding. He hadn't just been taken from his life. He'd been dropped into the middle of a war he didn't understand, wearing a target he never asked to wear. "I want to go home," Soren said, quieter now. "I'm sure you do," Mercer said, not unkindly but not gently either. "Doesn't change the fact that you can't." Ray stepped forward before Mercer could say more, crouching slightly so she was closer to eye level with Soren. Her expression softened just slightly. "Your grandmother," she said. "She's the one who raised you, yes. Sick in the house near the mill." Soren's breath caught. "How do you know that?" "Because Damon had someone checking on her the moment you were brought here." Ray's voice was steady, factual, the kind of voice that didn't waste time on comfort it couldn't back up with truth. "She's safe. Someone's watching the house. She thinks you're staying with a friend a few towns over. That's the story we gave the doctor who visits her." Soren felt his eyes burn, tears rising fast and unwelcome. Why would he do that? Why does any of this matter to him? Reyes and Mercer exchanged a look Soren couldn't read. That, Mercer said finally, is a very good question. Damon didn't return until well past midnight. Soren heard him before he saw him, footsteps heavier than before, uneven, like something was wrong with the way he was walking. When the door opened, Soren understood why. Blood, not much, but enough. A dark line across Damon's jaw, another soaking through the sleeve of his once pristine shirt, now torn at the shoulder. "You're hurt," Soren said before he could stop himself, the words leaving him on instinct rather than thought. Damon paused in the doorway, seeming almost surprised by the concern in Soren's voice. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing, you're bleeding." "I've had worse." Damon crossed the room slowly, lowering himself into the chair near the fireplace with the careful movements of someone hiding more pain than he wanted to admit to. He glanced at Soren's wrist, at the chain still locked there, and something tightened in his expression. "Has anyone hurt you?" "No," Soren hesitated. "Reyes told me about my grandmother, that someone's watching her." "Good." Damon's eyes closed briefly, exhaustion written plain across his face for just a moment before he pulled it back into something more composed. "That's one less thing to worry about." "One less thing," Soren repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. "People are shooting at each other because of me. My grandmother has strangers watching her house. I'm chained to a bed in a place I don't recognize, and you're telling me that's one less thing to worry about. Compared to you being dead in a ditch by morning, yes." Damon's voice sharpened, though Soren understood, even through his own fear, that the sharpness wasn't really meant for him. It was meant for the situation itself, for the war he hadn't chosen and couldn't escape. "The Callahans don't play games, Soren. If they'd taken you instead of me managing to get to you first, you would already be a bargaining chip in someone else's hands. Or worse." Soren swallowed hard. "So this is better." Damon didn't answer right away. He leaned his head back against the chair, eyes on the ceiling, blood still drying along his jaw. "No," he admitted quietly. "It's not better, it's just what I had." Something in his voice, tired, honest, stripped of the composure he'd worn like armor since Soren first woke up in this room, made Soren's anger falter just slightly. "Why me?" Soren asked, softer now. "Out of everyone, why did you even talk to me that day at the market?" Damon was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, less careful, more raw. "I don't fully know. I saw you picking through apples like the world hadn't taught you yet to be afraid of it. I don't remember the last time I saw someone look that unguarded." Soren's chest tightened at the words, at the way Damon said them, like a confession he hadn't planned on making. "That's not a good enough reason to ruin someone's life," Soren said, though the edge in his voice had softened considerably. "No," Damon agreed, "it's not." The twist came 3 days later, and it came from a place Soren never expected. He'd grown used to the room by then, used to Reyes bringing him meals, used to the low murmur of voices in the hallway that no longer made his heart race the way it once had. The chain had even been lengthened, giving him room to reach the window, though it still held him firmly to the bed. He was standing at that window, watching the grounds below, when Mercer entered without knocking, his face grim in a way Soren hadn't seen before. "We caught one of them," Mercer said, not to Soren directly, though Soren was the only one in the room. "One of the men from the river." Soren's whole body went still. "He talked," Mercer continued, "eventually. Turns out this was never really about hurting Damon at all, not at first." He paused, watching Soren carefully now. "You were the actual target from the beginning, not Damon. You." Soren's mind spun, trying to make the pieces fit. "That doesn't make sense. I'm nobody, I'm just—" "Your mother," Mercer said, cutting him off gently, "wasn't just anybody. She was Callahan's sister. The one who ran 20 years ago before you were even born and changed her name and raised you somewhere no one was supposed to find." The room seemed to tilt beneath Soren's feet. That's not, my grandmother never told me anything like that. Because your grandmother spent 2 decades making sure you'd never have to know, Mercer said. But someone finally found the trail, and once they did, taking you wasn't about hurting Damon anymore. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. It was about getting back what the Callahans believe was always theirs. Soren stared at him, the chain suddenly feeling heavier around his wrist than it ever had before, not because of what it kept him from, but because of what it now meant. He was standing in the middle of not a stranger's war at all. His own family's. Soren didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the bed with the chain pooled in his lap, turning Mercer's words over and over until they stopped sounding like sentences and started sounding like some strange, impossible riddle. Your mother wasn't just anybody. He tried to remember her face and couldn't, not really, just fragments. A photograph his grandmother kept in a drawer, a woman with dark eyes and a soft smile, gone before Soren was old enough to hold onto any memory of his own. His grandmother had told him she died sick, years ago, far from home. She never said which home. She never said why they moved 3 times before Soren turned 5, or why she flinched sometimes at black cars passing slow on the road. Now he understood. Now, sitting in a locked room with a chain around his wrist, 20 years of quiet finally made a terrible kind of sense. The door opened just past dawn. Damon stood there, dressed, composed, though the shadows under his eyes told Soren he hadn't slept either. Mercer told you, Damon said. It wasn't a question. Why didn't you? Soren's voice cracked on the words, exhaustion and hurt bleeding through despite his effort to hold them back. You knew. You've known since that night, haven't you? Damon's jaw tightened. I suspected. I didn't know for certain until Mercer got the confession yesterday. You still should have told me. I was trying to protect you from one more thing to be afraid of. Damon crossed the room, stopping at a careful distance, the way he always did, like he'd made a private rule about it. I was wrong. I see that now. Soren stood, the chain rattling with the motion, and for the first time since he'd woken in this bed, he didn't feel afraid of the man standing across from him. He felt something else entirely, anger, grief, confusion, and underneath all of it, something warmer he didn't have a name for yet. I don't even know who I am anymore, Soren said quietly. 20 minutes ago, I was a boy who sold apples and took care of his grandmother. Now I'm supposed to be someone the Callahan family thinks belongs to them. You're not anyone's, Damon said, low and fierce. Not theirs, not mine. You belong to yourself, Soren. That hasn't changed no matter what anyone else believes. Before Soren could answer, the sound of running footsteps echoed down the hallway. Reyes appeared in the doorway, breathless, her face pale in a way Soren hadn't seen on her before. They're here, she said. The Callahans at the front gate. They're not hiding it this time, they're asking for him by name. Damon's whole body went rigid. Which name? Both, Reyes said. Yours and his. Soren watched from the window as the black cars rolled up the long drive, 6 of them, sleek and silent, stopping in a wide arc before the front steps. Men stepped out in dark coats, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world, like the outcome of this morning had already been decided somewhere Soren wasn't invited to. One man stepped forward from the rest, older, silver-haired, sharp-featured in a way that struck something deep and unfamiliar in Soren's chest. Even from the window, even at this distance, Soren felt it. Recognition. Not memory, but something in the blood, some old inherited instinct that whispered this is family, even as every other part of him recoiled from the thought. That's him, Damon said quietly beside him. Callahan. He looks, Soren's voice faltered. He looks like the photograph, my mother's photograph. Damon didn't answer. His hand found the key at his belt, the small brass key that had sat there since the first night, untouched, waiting. He held it out now. I'm not chaining you to anything anymore, he said. Not while that man is standing on my property asking for you like you're something to be collected. Soren's hands shook as Damon unlocked the cuff, the metal falling away from his wrist for the first time in 3 days. He rubbed at the raw skin beneath it, staring at the mark left behind, then up at Damon. "What happens now?" "Now," Damon said, "you decide. I won't force you to stay and I won't force you to go with them. But whatever you choose it standing on your own feet, not because someone dragged you there." The walk down to the front steps felt longer than any walk Soren had ever taken. Damon stayed beside him, close but not touching, Reyes and Mercer flanking them with quiet, careful steps of their own. Callahan watched them approach with an expression Soren couldn't read, not quite warmth, not quite hostility, something colder and more calculating than either. "So," Callahan said when they were close enough, "the boy my sister spent her whole life hiding." His eyes swept over Soren slowly, assessing, the way a man studies something valuable he's finally recovered after a long search. "You have her eyes." Soren's throat tightened. "I don't know you." "No," Callahan agreed almost gently. "But you will. Family is family, whatever distance time puts between it." His gaze shifted to Damon, and the gentleness vanished entirely. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble protecting something that was never yours to protect, Voss." "He's not a possession," Damon said, voice flat and hard. "Not yours, not mine." Spoken like a man who's already decided he wants him for himself. Callahan's smile was thin, humorless. "Careful, boy. Wanting something in this world usually means someone tries to take it from you." The threat hung in the air, plain and unmistakable. Soren felt Damon go tense beside him, felt the careful stillness of a man calculating exactly how many ways this next minute could go wrong. Then Soren stepped forward, before he could think better of it, before fear could catch up to whatever strange courage had risen in his chest. "I want to hear about her," Soren said, looking directly at Callahan. "My mother, not from you standing at a gate with 6 cars and a threat behind every word. If you want me to know my family, then show me I actually have one worth knowing, not one that hunts people down in rivers at night." Callahan's expression flickered, surprise maybe, or something closer to respect he hadn't expected to feel. "You have her stubbornness too, it seems." "Maybe I do." Soren's voice steadied with every word, fear transforming slowly into something firmer. "But I grew up with a grandmother who loved me without chains, without threats, without cars full of men standing behind every sentence. If that's what family is supposed to look like, then I already have one. And it isn't you." The silence that followed stretched long and taut, every person on those steps holding their breath, waiting to see which way the moment would break. Then unexpectedly, Callahan laughed, short, sharp, almost startled out of him. "Careful," he said again, though the edge in his voice had shifted into something almost like amusement. "That kind of fire is exactly what got your mother killed, trying to walk away from this family." "Then maybe," Soren said, "it's time someone proved that fire can survive it too." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Callahan inclined his head slightly, an unreadable gesture that could have meant surrender or could have meant a promise of return. "We'll speak again," he said, already turning back toward the cars. "This isn't finished, boy. Blood doesn't simply walk away because you wish it would." The cars pulled away one by one, engines fatting into the distance until the drive stood empty again, silent except for the wind moving through the trees. Soren's knees nearly buckled the moment the last car disappeared. Damon caught him before he could fall, steadying him with careful hands, and for the first time since the river, Soren let himself lean into someone else's strength without flinching away from it. "You were incredible," Damon said quietly, close to his ear. "I was terrified," Soren admitted, voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "That's what incredible usually looks like," Damon said, and Soren felt rather than saw the small, rare smile that came with the words. 3 weeks passed before Soren returned to his grandmother's house, and even then, he didn't return the same person who had left it. The morning was soft and golden when the car pulled up along the familiar dirt road, past the broken fence, past the field of wildflowers now bending gently in a warm breeze. Soren's hand rested on the door handle for a long moment before he opened it, breathing in air that smelled like home for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. His grandmother was waiting on the porch. She must have heard the car from inside, must have known before he even stepped out. She looked smaller than he remembered, thinner, the sickness still lingering in the slowness of her movements. But her eyes, when they found him, were exactly the same, sharp and warm and endlessly, fiercely proud. Soren, her voice broke on his name. He was across the yard before he even realized he was running, arms wrapping around her carefully, mindful of how fragile she felt against him now. She held him back just as tightly, one hand cradling the back of his head, the way she used to when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "I'm sorry," Soren said into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry I scared you." "You have nothing to apologize for." She pulled back just enough to look at him, cupping his face in both hands, studying him like she was memorizing every inch of it again. "I always knew this day might come. I just prayed it wouldn't." "You knew about my mother," Soren said quietly. "About the Callahans." Something shifted in his grandmother's expression, not surprise, but a tired kind of relief, like a burden she'd carried alone for 2 decades had finally, mercifully been set down. "I knew," she admitted. "I spent 20 years hoping you'd never have to. I understand why you didn't tell me." "Do you?" Her eyes searched his face carefully. Soren thought of Damon, standing on those front steps with a key in his hand, choosing to unlock the chain before anything else, choosing Soren's freedom over his own safety. He thought of Callahan's threat, and the strange, complicated ache of learning where he came from without ever having asked to know it. "I do," Soren said finally. "You were protecting me, just like someone else did a few weeks ago." His grandmother's gaze moved past him, toward the car still idling at the end of the drive, toward the tall figure standing beside it, giving them privacy but close enough to be present if needed. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Is that him?" Soren felt heat rise in his cheeks. "That's him. The one Ray's told me about. The one who kept watch over this house while you were gone. You knew about that too." "I'm old," his grandmother said, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "Not foolish. I noticed the same car parked at the end of the road every night for 3 weeks. I simply chose not to ask questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to." Soren laughed despite himself, surprised by the sound of it after everything, surprised that laughter still lived somewhere inside him after all that had happened. "Invite him in," his grandmother said. "I'd like to know the man who thought my grandson was worth starting a war over." Damon sat stiffly at the small kitchen table that afternoon, looking entirely out of place in his tailored coat among the modest wooden furniture and faded curtains, though he seemed to be trying his best not to show it. Soren's grandmother poured tea with steady, deliberate movements, watching Damon over the rim of her own cup with an expression that missed nothing. "So," she said finally, setting the teapot down, "you're the one they call Voss." "Yes, ma'am." "And you chained my grandson to a bed." Damon's composure faltered just slightly, color rising along his jaw. "To protect him. It was the only way I know why," she said, cutting him off, though not unkindly. "Soren explained it to me, several times actually, with a great deal of insistence that I understand every detail before I formed an opinion of you." Her eyes flicked briefly to Soren, who suddenly found the pattern on his teacup very interesting. "That tells me something on its own." Damon glanced at Soren, something soft passing between them that Soren's grandmother did not miss. "I intend to make sure nothing like that happens to him again," Damon said, voice steady now, sincere in a way that left no room for doubt. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs." "And what does that mean for the two of you exactly?" she asked, direct in the way only grandmothers ever truly managed to be. "What is this? A debt he owes you for saving his life, or something else. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to be answer in itself. Soren felt his heart pounding, unsure himself how he wanted Damon to respond, though some part of him already knew. Something else, Damon said quietly, eyes on Soren rather than his grandmother now. If he wants it to be. Soren's breath caught. Across the table, his grandmother's expression softened into something almost amused, almost knowing, the particular look of a woman who had seen enough of life to recognize its beginnings when they sat plainly in front of her. "Well," she said, rising slowly to gather the teacups, "I suppose we'll simply have to see what the boy decides then, won't we?" They walked to the river that evening, the same river, though it looked different now under the soft orange wash of sunset instead of the cold silver of moonlight. Soren stood at the edge of the water, arms wrapped around himself, remembering the last time he'd stood in this exact spot. The fear, the hands pulling him under, the chain waiting for him on the other side of that terrible night. "Does it still frighten you?" Damon asked, standing beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Soren considered the question honestly. "A little," he admitted, "but not as much as it did." He glanced sideways, catching Damon's profile in the fading light. "I think that's because of what came after, not just the fear, you too." Damon turned to face him fully then, something vulnerable crossing his features that Soren had rarely seen in the weeks they'd spent together. Not the composed leader who commanded rooms full of dangerous men, but simply a man, uncertain and hopeful in equal measure. "I never intended for any of this to happen the way it did," Damon said. "I never meant to put you in danger. If I could go back and simply never speak to you in that market." "Don't," Soren interrupted gently. "Don't wish that away." "Why not?" Soren thought about it carefully before answering, wanting to get the words right, wanting Damon to understand something Soren himself had only recently come to understand. Because that day in the market was the first time in a long time someone looked at me like I was more than just careful or quiet or someone's responsibility to look after. "You looked at me like I mattered before you even knew anything about me." He paused. "And everything after that, the fear, the chain, even learning about my mother, none of it changes that you were the one who chose to protect me when it would have been easier not to." Damon reached out slowly, giving Soren every chance to step back if he wanted to, and gently brushed a strand of hair from Soren's face, his fingers lingering warm against his cheek. "I meant what I said to your grandmother," Damon murmured. "Whatever this becomes, it has to be something you choose, not something forced on you by circumstance or danger or gratitude." "I know." Soren leaned into the touch, something settling deep and certain in his chest. "That's exactly why I'm choosing it." The sun continued its slow descent behind the trees, painting the water in shades of gold and rose, and for the first time since that terrible night, the river felt like something gentle again, not a place where his old life ended, but where something new and unexpected had quietly begun. Months later, the town had grown used to the sight of Damon's car parked outside the little house near the mill, used to Soren walking the market square with someone tall and sharp-dressed at his side, no longer strangers whispering about danger, but simply two people who had chosen each other despite everything that first tried to keep them apart. The Callahans never returned with threats again. Word came instead, quietly, respectfully, an offer of peace between families who had once stood ready for war, a peace built not on fear, but on the simple, undeniable fact that Soren had refused to be claimed by anyone, and in doing so, had earned the respect of people who understood strength better than most. Soren's grandmother recovered slowly through that autumn, sitting on her porch again by winter, watching her grandson walk the market square each morning with a lightness in his step that had never quite been there before, not free from the world's dangers entirely, but no longer alone in facing them. And some evenings, when the light turned gold and soft, Soren still walked down to the river, sometimes alone, more often now with Damon beside him, watching the water move steady and calm beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. He had jumped into that river once, looking only for a moment's peace. He never could have known he would wake up chained. He never could have known that chain would lead him, somehow, impossibly, home. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe because more stories just like this one, full of danger, tenderness, and everything in between, are on the way. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.